Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week's Torah reading, Parashat Vayigash, contains one of the great stories of reconciliation in all of literature. The story of how Joseph and his brothers finally reconcile, where Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers, all because Judah approaches Joseph, who doesn't know, of course, this is Joseph, but Judah approaches Vayigash Elav Yehudah. As he approaches physically, he approaches emotionally as well. I want to share that story in the context of two other stories of reconciliation and conflict, because this notion of reconciliation, I think, is really central to where we are today as citizens in the United States, as people in the Western world. We're thinking a lot about what it means to come together, about what it means to be apart, about what it means to be in conflict. So this story and this Shabbat has a tremendous amount to teach all of us. I want to begin by talking not about the Torah reading, but by talking about the Haftarah. The Haftarah is the second half of Ezekiel chapter 37. Ezekiel chapter 37 is an incredible chapter, powerful, moving, and beautifully written. The first half of the chapter is the very famous section called the Valley of Dry Bones, where we read about the bones of Israel coming back to life. This notion that the people of Israel, no matter how desperate or how close to death they might be, they will always be able to come back to life. That's the first half of the chapter. The second half of the chapter is about reconciliation between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel. We have to remember that for most of biblical history, biblical Jewish history, there was no united kingdom. There was a split kingdom between the north and the south. And the second half of Ezekiel 37 talks about bringing those two halves together, represented by two sticks, bringing them together so that we can be together as one nation. They're beautiful verses with a powerful and important message. Before we get to the Torah reading, I want to talk about another story of reconciliation, a famous one that is found in the Mishnah. In Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, we read the story of a conflict between two rabbis, between Rabban Gamliel, who was the leader of the rabbis of the Jews in Eretz Israel in his day, and Rabbi Yehoshua. They disagreed about something concerning the calendar. They disagreed, and the disagreement was incredibly important because in their day, there was no fixed calendar. There was no calendar you open up and look and you know when the holidays start and when they end and when Rosh Chodesh is, the new month. They had to determine through the work of the Sanhedrin, the central court in Jerusalem, exactly when each month started, exactly when the holidays were, and they wanted it to be unified. They wanted everyone to be celebrating the holidays on the same days for obvious reasons. A unified calendar is what brings community together. Just imagine if one group of Jews was celebrating Passover on one day, and another group was celebrating it 3 days later. No problem. So Rabban Gamliel declared when the new month was, and Rabbi Yehoshua disagreed. There were problems with witnesses, and Rabban Gamliel demanded that Rabbi Yehoshua agree to Rabban Gamliel's authority. Rabban Gamliel demanded that Rabbi Yehoshua appear before Rabban Gamliel, staff in hand, holding money on the day that Rabbi Yehoshua thinks is Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Yehoshua had a decision to make. Is he going to understand that he did not have as much authority as Rabban Gamliel and that he should cede to Rabban Gamliel? Or would he stand on principle and say, no, I can't come see you on that day because that's the day that I think is Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yehoshua finally gives in. He goes before Rabban Gamliel, and there is a scene of reconciliation, a scene that is powerful because we can understand the very human emotions and the dynamic in play here. There are issues of power. There are issues of dominance and issues of someone feeling that they're right. But what happens when two people feel that they're right? How can they ever come together? That brings us to our Torah reading. The story of Joseph and his brothers is a powerful story, a drama that many of us will recognize as full of emotions and full of feelings and understandings and ways of life that we can all relate to. We have families, we have siblings, we have children and parents and all kinds of issues that come up. We see all of them in the Joseph story. This week's Torah reading begins with Judah approaching Joseph. Judah finally rises to the occasion as the leader of his family. He approaches Joseph and he begs him to let Benjamin, their youngest brother, the one whom Jacob loves more than any other, Judah begs him to let Benjamin live, to let Benjamin go. Because if Benjamin is not allowed to return back to Jacob, Judah tells Joseph, then Judah is afraid father Jacob will die. Judah's speech finally convinces Joseph that his brothers have learned their lesson, that they are compassionate and they are kind, that they were all the things that they were not when Joseph was growing up, and that it is finally the appropriate time for Joseph to reveal his identity to his brothers. He does so, and we are presented with a beautiful scene of reconciliation, of brothers coming together. But it is not without a tinge of remembrance of the past. And so Joseph tells his brothers to go back and get their father and bring their whole household back to Egypt. And he tells his brothers, Al tirgazu, do not be quarrelsome on the way. Do not argue amongst yourselves. He doesn't explain what he means by that, but the Midrash does, and Rashi does. So what does Rashi say? There are a few other explanations, but one explanation that we understand from our tradition is that Joseph was telling his brothers, do not argue on the way about who was responsible for sending me into slavery. Do not argue on the way about who among you is more responsible than the other. It all turned out okay. God meant for all of this to happen so that I would be in Egypt, so that I could help the Egyptian people, and that I could actually help you, my family. Just let it go, Joseph is saying. That is an even more powerful message of reconciliation than the actual scene with Judah and Joseph. And it leaves us with a beautiful understanding of what is possible. Reconciliation, whether it is the story of the two kingdoms and the Haftarah, whether it is the story of these two rabbis who come together, or whether it is the story of a family that finally figures out how to be together, how to love each other, how to not compete. We understand what it takes to reconcile in the Torah and in the Haftarah. And we are left wondering what it means and what it will take to reconcile among the American people. There's so much anger, so much distrust. I certainly hope, and I'm sure you join me in hoping that whatever differences may remain, there will be reconciliation. And we will come together as a united group of people, as one nation, both to fight COVID and to move ahead and to be together and to understand what it means to be a nation that is united in purpose and principle, understanding that we have differences, understanding that it is those differences that give us strength, but understanding that in the direst of occasions, when the chips are down and we need each other, we will be there to help each other. Shabbat Shalom.